HOA Karen invaded my farm for an event, but I left her stranded with the cows. If there's one thing I've learned over the years living on my farm, it's that some people just don't know how to respect private property. You can put up signs, erect fences, even put up scarecrows if you want. There's always one stubborn person who thinks your land is a public playground. And at the top of that list was her. The woman had been a walking nightmare ever since she moved to the area. Officially, the farm wasn't part of the HOA-controlled community, but that didn't stop this lady from acting like she was in charge of everything within a 5-kilometer radius. The kind of person who believes that authority comes down to who speaks the loudest and makes the most threats. I've dealt with her craziness before. Complaints about the smell of the stable, tantrums because my roosters crowed too early. Amazing. And once she even tried to argue that I shouldn't use my own tractor because it was ugly and clashed with the look of the community. But this time she outdid herself. It was a Saturday morning, and I was ready for a long and well-deserved trip. After months working on the farm, I would finally have some time to relax in a chalet in the mountains, far from any sign of civilization. My closest neighbors knew that I would be away, which meant that anyone on my property without my permission would automatically be trespassing. Before leaving, I took one last look around the farm. The barn was locked, the animals fed, the fence reinforced. Everything was in order. Nothing could go wrong. Until I reached the main gate, and I nearly broke my neck trying to understand the absurd scene unfolding before my eyes. The HOA had turned my farm into a parking lot. Rows of cars covered my lawn, reaching all the way to the stable entrance. Shiny SUVs, luxury sedans, and even a damn food truck were parked as if it were an official event. I saw people walking around with clipboards, organizing spaces as if they owned the place. I took a deep breath. I restrained the urge to shout profanities at the first idiot in a polo shirt who crossed my path. Instead, I did what any sensible person would do. I marched to the epicenter of the disaster, looking for the genius behind it, and there she was, in the middle of it all, organizing the cars like a makeshift parking manager. The woman was dressed as if she were going to an important meeting. Pencil skirt, high heels, that fake smile of someone who knows she's wrong but is going to insist anyway. With a clipboard in hand, she was giving instructions to a poor guy who looked as confused as I was. This space here is VIP, so make sure that only the special guests stay in front of the barn fence. I had to count to 10. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had made a mistake and used my land without meaning to. But no. As soon as she saw me, the smile disappeared. Not that she looked guilty. Far from it. It was more of a, damn, now I'm going to have to listen to a lecture look. I approached, my steps heavy, crossing my arms like a teacher about to suspend a troublesome pupil. She knew she shouldn't be there, and I couldn't wait to see the lame excuse that would follow. The scene I witnessed at that moment was so surreal that for a second I thought I was having a delirium caused by fatigue. My farm, my private property, had been transformed into a gigantic parking lot without my permission. Luxury SUVs, shiny sedans, entire family minivans, and even a damn food truck were scattered across the lawn, crushing the earth, destroying the pasture, and blocking access to the barn. I could see makeshift, reserved for HOA signs taped up in places, as if someone actually had the right to determine where people could and couldn't park on my property. There were also orange cones strategically placed to organize the spaces, as if this were a legitimate operation and not a blatant theft of land. And right in the middle of all this nonsense, there she was, in a pencil skirt and high heels, in the middle of my pasture. The woman was holding a clipboard and giving orders to a guy who seemed as lost as I was. No, VIP guests should stay closer to the entrance, so they don't have to walk too far. Oh, and make sure the cars are lined up properly. We don't want any visual clutter, do we? I blinked, trying to process it, but the truth was one. This woman had invaded my farm and turned it into a cheap imitation of a shopping mall parking lot. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the avalanche of curses that threatened to escape my mouth. I wasn't going to shout. Yet, first, I wanted to understand the extent of her audacity. I approached, crossing my arms, and waited until she noticed me. Which, by the way, took a while, because this woman was so comfortable in my space that she didn't even seem to care that it wasn't hers. When she finally saw me, she jumped slightly, but soon regained her composure. "Ah!" she exclaimed, forcing a smile that looked rehearsed. "You're back early." "I'm back early." Was that all she had to say? No apology, no justification. Just, "You're back early," as if I were an intruder on my own farm. I breathed in slowly. "What the hell is going on here?" She sighed and adjusted her clipboard against her chest, adopting the tone of someone about to give a motivational talk. "Well, you see, the HOA was organizing an important event for the community, and we needed a large space to park the guests. Your farm was empty, so I thought it would be the most logical option. You know, it's a waste to leave such a large space unused." She said it so naturally that, if I hadn't known I was awake, I'd have been sure it was a nightmare. I thought it would be the most logical option. Yes, of course. As if my property were a wasteland waiting for a more efficient use. As if I had an obligation to give up my space to the HOA's daydreams. But what really pissed me off was the way she said, "Your farm was empty," as if that automatically meant anyone could use it. It was like saying, "I saw that your house was empty at the weekend, so I decided to have a party there." I took a deep breath. I already knew that this woman was disaster incarnate, but this time she really outdid herself. I looked around, trying to take in the size of the damage. The land was already marked with tire tracks, which meant that after all this, I would have to replant a large part of the pasture. The chickens were huddled in the corner of the paddock, frightened by the noise of the engines and the music coming from somewhere further away. And then, as if all this wasn't outrageous enough, the woman had the audacity to keep talking, as if she were doing me a favor. "If you think about it, this could be great for you," she said, gesturing enthusiastically. "We're bringing traffic to your farm, more visibility. You could even charge a parking fee. That would be a great deal." Of course, because my dream was to turn my farm into a makeshift parking lot for a bunch of stupid people. I had to laugh, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you realize you're dealing with a level of assholery so high, it's almost admirable. "I want my farm empty in 5 minutes, or I'm going to start towing these cars myself." She blinked in surprise, as if she didn't believe I was really bothered. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she exclaimed, trying to play the conciliator. "The event finishes in a few hours. We can just leave things as they are until then, and then everyone will leave without prejudice. No harm done?" I looked at the mess around me, the destroyed soil, the fences already crooked from the cars pulling up, my chickens that looked like they were about to suffer a nervous breakdown, and she had the gall to say, "No harm done." My blood boiled, but instead of exploding on the spot, I smiled, because, at that moment, I had an idea, a glorious idea, an idea that would make that woman never try anything like it again in her life. So I kept my voice calm and let it out. "All right, you can finish the event." She widened her eyes in surprise. I hadn't expected that response. "Really?" I shook my head positively. She smiled, satisfied, as if she had won. But what she didn't know was that I had just prepared the biggest change of her life, and I was going to have a lot of fun watching it all unfold. The woman really believed she had won. As she went back to handing out orders with her clipboard, a satisfied smile on her face, I walked away, pretending to have accepted the situation. She thought that I had been convinced by her trickery, that her logic, or rather lack of logic, had made me realize that turning my farm into a makeshift parking lot was a golden opportunity. Ah, naivety. While the HOA festivities continued and the cars kept arriving, I went to the main gate, and I locked everything. Thick chain, industrial padlock. no entry, and no exit. Then I repeated the process at the secondary gate, which led to a small side road. More chain, more padlock. Now no one would leave without talking to me first. I wanted to see how long it would take before anyone noticed. So instead of going back to the farm, I went home, had a leisurely coffee, and started organizing my suitcase. Yes, because I was still on vacation. I wasn't going to miss it for the world. Through the living room window, I watched as the first people started trying to leave. I saw a guy get into his car, start the engine, reverse, and then stop, suddenly, when he realized that the gate was closed and locked. I watched as he got out of the car and checked the gate with his hands, as if he could just force it open. Then he called someone else. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed at the entrance, all trying to understand what was going on. And then, like a flash of lightning, the woman understood. She came marching in, high heels sinking into the ground, the clipboard now forgotten in her hand. The smile from before was completely gone. From a distance, I saw her lips moving fast, her hands gesticulating, clearly shouting at someone. Then she reached for her cell phone, and that's when my cell phone rang. I let it ring until it almost hit voicemail, just to take advantage of her growing impatience. I picked it up, putting it on speaker just to laugh as I packed my suitcase. "Did you lock the gate?" Her voice came out tense, trying to maintain a false calm. "Yes, I did," I replied casually. "What are you doing?" "There are dozens of people here." I grabbed a folded shirt and put it in my suitcase, without hurrying. "Yes, I know. But as you said yourself, the event ends in a few hours, doesn't it? So I think you can enjoy it a little longer." Silence. I could hear her breathing speeding up, and I could almost see the vein in her neck pulsing with anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't keep us trapped here." "Trapped? No, not at all," I continued, grabbing some more clothes. "It's just that, well, I locked the gate because I'm going on vacation, and I thought that, since you were using my property without permission, the least I could do was make sure everything was safe until I got back." She nearly choked. "That's illegal." I laughed. I laughed out loud. "Illegal? Do you really want to talk about illegality, lady? I'm going to turn someone else's farm into a parking lot without asking." She remained silent. On the other end of the line, the noise of voices increased, the panic growing. "Open the gate, now!" "Oh, I'd love to, but I'm already in the car on the way to the highway. I'm going to spend a few days relaxing in the mountains. You know, that place where people ask permission before using what isn't theirs." I hung up before she could answer. Now I just had to wait. And, oh, was it worth the wait? When I hung up the phone, I knew that the real chaos was just beginning. The woman and her guests were officially trapped inside my farm, and from the looks of it, none of them had an escape plan. I, on the other hand, had a great plan: go on my vacation and let them sort themselves out. As I drove down the road, I took the opportunity to check the messages that kept arriving on my cell phone. First came the typed screams, accompanied by enough exclamation marks to fill a novel. Then came the threats to sue, followed by increasingly desperate messages. When the attempts at intimidation failed, the woman tried to change tactics, adopting a tone sweeter and more artificial than a margarine commercial. She started offering me ridiculous proposals, such as a special deal where I could negotiate with the HOA for future benefits. In other words, after invading my property without permission, they now thought they could give me crumbs as a reward. I ignored all the messages, not because I didn't want to revel in their misfortune, but because I knew the best part was yet to come. And I was right. An hour later, the woman and her guests began to realize that the situation wasn't going to resolve itself magically. They tried to open the padlocks themselves, fiddled with the chain, forced the gates. Nothing worked. Frustration grew. The heat made impatience worse, and the socializing smiles of the event were replaced by expressions of pure hatred. That's when someone had the bright idea of calling a cab to get away from the farm. But, as I already knew, that wouldn't do any good. My property was a long way from the city, far enough away that it would take an app car at least an hour to get there. And when they finally realized that, panic started to set in. But the best part was when they decided to call the police. Yes, the woman, in her infinite arrogance, thought that the law would be on her side. She called the police and reported the case as if it were a serious emergency, probably trying to paint the situation as a kidnapping. I could already picture the scene, her holding her cell phone with her voice shaking, trying to sound like a poor, wronged victim, while dozens of sweaty people around her huffed with rage. When my phone rang again, I saw that this time it was a different number. I picked up and heard the voice of an officer, speaking with the calm tone of someone who has already realized that he is dealing with an absurd story. He explained that he had received a report that a group of people were trapped on my farm and wanted to know my version of events. I took a deep breath to hold back my laughter and explained, with the patience of a saint, that those people didn't have permission to be there. I said that I had locked my property before I left for vacation, and that no one had been invited or authorized to use it as a parking lot. Finally, I asked quite innocently, "Did anyone claim that they had my permission to be there?" The silence on the other end was music to my ears. The policeman took a deep breath before answering, and that's when I realized that he too had understood the mess. He said he was going to talk to the group and resolve the situation. I could tell by the tone of his voice that he wasn't at all excited about the idea of dealing with that woman. And that's exactly what happened. What was supposed to be an elegant HOA event turned into a public mess. When the police arrived, they began questioning everyone present, asking for proof that they had permission to be there. Most people started stuttering because, of course, no one had permission for anything. The woman tried to argue, tried to play the victim, but nothing worked. In the end, it was clear to everyone that the problem wasn't me, but her. The HOA was fined for misuse of private property and violation of local regulations. But the sweetest part of the revenge was that the HOA members themselves, who had previously followed this woman blindly, turned against her. The scandal was so great that a few weeks later, she was removed from her position within the HOA. The board decided that her leadership was damaging the association's reputation. And the best part? I never had a problem with her again. When I returned from vacation, the farm was still a bit of a mess, with tire tracks and trash strewn about, but all in all, nothing I couldn't fix. But her reputation, that was destroyed forever. The feeling of peace in knowing that I would never have to deal with this woman again was the real reward. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.